Oh, my friends, do we have a great episode for Friday here on the Locked On Nets podcast? Defining greatness is a winning component of that. And is there anyone that checks every box by Kevin Durant standards? We're going to dive in on a fun Twitter conversation that kicked off a deeper dive from yours truly right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
No, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, Doug Norrie, owner-operator DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, DraftKings, FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms, and let you know this episode is going to be brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, it's where the game starts. And Doug, where we start on a Friday is this kickoff conversation. Listen, the Holdrums of the offseason, not by Brooklyn Nets standards, and certainly not for Kevin Durant. We go right into a question that was posed to him. What defines the best player in the NBA? Kicked off on Twitter by Trayvon Edwards. What determines, we should put it as, the best player in the NBA? Kevin Durant's response, I think it about hits the mark.
Yeah, I'll get to his response in 1 second. I will say that Kevin Durant, offseason Kevin Durant's a fun time too, because he definitely wants to mix it up on Twitter. I don't always follow athletes on Twitter just because whatever. I mostly just use it as a news source. KD is one of the few that I do follow, mostly because it's pretty entertaining because he doesn't.
I don't always want to see him in Monaco, chilling by the water's edge, right?
I don't even care about that. He just has no time for the trolls. He will clap back against people that throw it out there against them. He'll do that stuff. So, but this set of answers that he took and responded to, one to Trayvon and then one to Nick Gelso later that we'll get to, but did open up some thought stuff for you and I think just Nets fandom in general around how KD views basketball. So here's his response, and then to the question of what determines the best player in the NBA: size for position, shot making, efficiency, IQ, consistency, being able to guard multiple positions, a willing passer, coachable, energetic, and then ... in my humble opinion. So when you first saw that, what was your first reaction to this answer? Because I think it's honest. But I'm wondering if and we actually only talking about this quote. We actually didn't talk about what our opinions on it were too much. What were your opinions when you saw KD give this as the first answer? Then we'll do the follow-up.
It's not entirely sure that he didn't read the question as, how do you define you being the best player in the NBA, right? I think a lot of the tenets that he's speaking to, it's very easy to look back at Kevin Durant and say, yeah, he checks a lot of that, especially when you think about things like size for position and shot making efficiency, right? Basketball IQ. I think those are a lot of those boxes that Kevin Durant, as we know, has always been very good at. There's some of the secondary pieces that I think are interesting to examine from a just NBA standpoint, because any defensive component, I'll say, is a hard one to fully wrap your head around, because we always talk about how situational that effort can be. So how many guys check that box off consistently? But by and large, man, my initial reaction was probably a short list, and I don't know if attaching it to best player in the NBA. I think you can check a lot of these boxes and not necessarily be finding yourself saying these are the best players in the NBA.
Yeah, so I think that for the most part, this just defines mostly just a good basketball player, and putting in coachable in there, and just effort and things like that. I actually think,
some intangibles.
Yeah, well, funny enough, I actually think most good NBA players just fit this right out of the gate, because you really can't be good, I don't think, unless you're most of these things right away. I'm talking about the really good players. Now, I do think you can scale it down and have guys who maybe aren't as good, but still do a lot, and then they contribute to winning basketball because they maybe play above their pay grade. I think the Nets have some examples of that. But I think from a high level, this answer made sense. It did make us start wondering who we thought on the Nets fit this bill, because I actually wonder I don't think he was taking a shot at anybody. I want to preface this by saying this for sure. I don't think he was taking I personally, at least, maybe you disagree, don't think he was taking any veiled shots here. I think this is actually just a pretty standard version of what a good basketball player is. The best basketball players would check nearly every single one of probably just the best ones check all these boxes, right? And KD does too. He's the biggest guy at his position. If you're going to call him a 4, if you're going to call him a 3, then he's easily the biggest. Shot making, obviously check. Efficiency, double check. IQ, I mean, check for sure. Consistency, definitely. Able to guard multiple positions. We talked about it yesterday many times that he's been able to do this. A willing passer, got better at this even as the year went on. Coachable, we think so. That's always hard to know. So that's one that's tough to say. Energetic, the guy's played as many minutes as anybody in the game. So like that list for him, for sure, like does check all the boxes, right? Yeah. But I guess it's just the question of like what comes next.
Yeah, well, let's go high level then before we talk, because I think it'll be interesting to apply this to the Brooklyn Nets when you take it away from not necessarily the best players in the NBA, but just guys that are checking a lot of these boxes, which to your point makes for good basketball players. And you think a winning possibility when you go through a roster. But NBA overall, because you said about it, I think it's pretty easy if you're thinking about who are some of the names that you immediately come to mind. It's Giannis, it's going to be the Joker, it's going to be Joel Embiid. You're watching Luka now go into the Western Conference Finals. Maybe he fits that bill, certainly checks a lot of those boxes. I'll leave it. You can throw out other names. I have one that I think is probably lower down the list in terms of when you're ranking NBA players, but does a lot of these things really well. And I also have a guy that's considered one of the best players in the league that maybe doesn't do enough of all of these categories equally. So I'll put out the low line. I think Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler is a guy that clearly does way more of these categorical things with a high level of consistency. Now, that's because he has to probably max out to keep himself as close to the upper echelon of players in the league, but he is not in the same category as pure NBA athlete as Giannis, as Luka, as Joker, as Kevin Durant.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. And I actually heard this on a podcast the other day related to Jimmy Butler. And it was actually talking about Jimmy Butler versus James Harden, and about how they were sort of like, was it a Hollinger or Duncan? I can't remember exactly which one. But I think that was it. So I'm just trying to give him props because I don't want to just say I heard it and then not say who'd said it. But I'm pretty sure it was Hollinger and Duncan talking about Jimmy Butler compared to James Harden, ex-net, obviously, and how just the landscape of the opinions around those two guys had changed, where if you just flipped it like 3 years ago, no one would have put Butler above Harden. And now it's like you definitely can't put Harden above Butler. And we're saying this before even game 1 of the Celtics series. We recorded this one a little early, but I think I totally agree with you that you have these certain players that kind of, because they check every box for sure, they are able to play above their talent level because it just ends up meaning you work harder than everybody else, right? Like you outwork everybody. And if you were already sort of on the cusp, this is the piece that checking all these boxes will be what takes you over. Look, you can never give yourself more size, right? Like you just can't, you just are basically who you are. So that's
my whole life, buddy.
Right, that's like the same. That's the one part where you just can't do anything about it pretty much. Like you just are the size you are. It's going to determine what position you can make. So besides that, this list, once you move that one away, the rest of the list is kind of within your grasp within a certain amount of work ethic and whatnot. And even like just the energy piece of it, even if you're going to talk about defensively, like you can just play better defense just by having energy. Again, it'll run up to problems at the very elite levels because you'll just be too small or too slow or whatever. No, but I totally agree with you on the Butler part. I think the more interesting part is going to be here in a second, like when we talk about this Nets team.
Yeah.
Around. And then we'll get to the second part of the quote too. Actually, let's do the second part of the quote here too, because I think that actually ends up informing where we're going with the rest of this.
Past the Jason Tatums of the world and the Drew Holidays, who I think kind of live inside of those spheres as well. But keeping it Brooklyn Nets centric, how many players on the Brooklyn Nets check the boxes by Kevin Durant standards? We'll get down into that in a second after we follow up on the dovetail of that quote right now, though. Got to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar. That's because what I like to do, my friends, as I get every year older, is think about ways to celebrate me every single day. And that's why I reach for a birthday cake puffs. You know that these bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, white chocolate with a little bit of festivity on top there. They're the first and only of their kind protein-infused marshmallow bars. They come from Built Bar, so you know they're going to be great for you. And that's because you know you're getting just 150 calories, 16 grams of protein, and only 9 grams of sugar in this limited flavor, which is an amazing option. If you're looking to stay healthy, get healthy, be healthy, and give yourself a little dose of energy when you're on the go. You've heard Doug talk about trying to fend off his daughter when these boxes come into his house. I'm trying to battle Courtney for them here in the apartment. The bottom line is they are, of course, also made with a collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of extra health benefits as well. You go to built.com right now and you can get cake puffs in your pocket. Built.com, use promo code LOCK15, get 15% off on your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. So then let's round out this quote here from Kevin Durant, because there was a follow-up question, and then we'll push it inside of the team specific and how some of these guys check these boxes. It was off of that first response, which you highlighted there. Then you had Nick Gelso, who followed up by saying, and he framed it with, serious question, should winning titles be a part of this? It's a good question. If titles aren't factored, it drastically increases the ranking. So and you can hit Kevin Durant's response before we think if this is applicable to greatest NBA players.
You're wondering in my opinion before I get to his response?
No, hit the quote, and then let's see how it rounds in.
Yeah. So Durant to that one has a pretty simple follow-up that's not too dissimilar to the first one. He says, do you contribute to winning basketball? Do you take good shots? Do you play good team defense? Do you make the extra pass, make hustle plays? I feel like there are a lot of players that played winning, and I'm going to assume he says played, and I'm going to say also play winning basketball, but their teams didn't win a championship. And so this goes along with the first one, though gets into the sort of the, not the specifics of it, but specifically around the championship pieces, or should NBA legacies be defined by championships? And does that mean how great of a player you are? I can see, so for me, I think I agree with Durant. I totally agree with Durant here. You can be a winning player and not win a championship. The simple fact is the math doesn't work. Like there's one championship per year and one team that can play, and really only 5 guys per season that really affect the championship once it really comes down to it, because it's basically like whatever the closing lineup, whatever the best 5 guys for your team are, that's the guy. Like, got 12th man on the bench contributed very little to the championship when it's all said and done. Sure. So it's really just 5 guys per year. And then among that group, there's only one best guy that you're discussing. So the math just doesn't work. There just have to be able to be more winning players and good players than this, that, by circumstance, bad luck, injury, you happen to be in this league at the same time as Michael Jordan, like it just, or LeBron or the Warriors, like the math just isn't going to work. So from that standpoint, it's not a cop out. Look, KD has championships. So like, he can say this at this point, but he's also correct in saying that it can't only be defined by championships, because frankly, there's lots of stuff you can do to win. And at some point, it's maybe not all on you, or there's just not enough to go around, I think, in the end.
When you're watching too, and by the way, I was waiting for the Dougism of that. There is only one championship, so it's hard to start to say whether or not someone was a successful or one of the best players in any sport when you only get to judge it, if you're going to judge it, by one stature. Did you win championships?
Well, can I add to one more thing to that?
Yeah.
What's funny about that is, usually guys that are in that discussion that people don't want to give it to, they're only in the discussion because they're already great. And now they're just needing one more talking point to bring it in. Like no one is debating. Well, I'll just say, is Malik Beasley great or not because he didn't have a championship? Like nobody cares, because he's like a fine, whatever. I'm just picking a random player. But being part of that championship discussion, you actually only get there if you are great.
It's why they talk about, I was going to say, like Charles Barkley is the great example, right? Because he had this phenomenal career and everyone knows how great he was. And yet he's always, you get to marginally put him a little bit lower, even though you say he's still one of the greatest players. And then people go, just didn't win a championship. Okay, great. It doesn't change the fact what he was as a player. And I was going to say,
or like a more recent example right now would be Chris Paul getting bounced here and having like a number of just, high profile playoff, bed boopings. Like he was just trying to keep the clean thing here.
I was even going to mention too, just to add into, is Luka right now, because I think so. Yes. And the other way this you look at it is, what if you're a team that by and large has the one superstar elite talent? Well, now you can always say you want to see him get there, But has there ever been a season where you look back and go, geez, well, if Luka had just done more, he could have been winning a championship? No, it's a product of the team that's around you as well. And that's where I think you lean on the first part of the response. What are the boxes that Luka checks? That's what makes him one of the best players in the NBA, let alone, as we like to say, like the old eye test can tell you who the best players in the league are. But this is where I disseminate between these two things. And you and we talked about this before on the podcast of like, I don't know how you can define players based on the championships they won. I know you want to marginally put the greatest of the greats into slightly separate categories. I've always been comfortable saying, yeah, they're all the greatest players in NBA. They're all the greatest in the NFL. It doesn't matter to me. I'm content knowing they're all great, whether or not they care about where they rank.
Right, of course, because the championship only piece, like I said, only matters when you're the best player. Like no one looks at the Bucks last season as like, well, Connaughton and Dante DiVincenzo got their rings, so they're great. Championship check. No, it's you're only talking about Giannis in this at this point. Right. You're actually not even talking about Middleton and even Drew Holiday. So you're not even kind of worried about that caliber of player. But what and look, the championship thing is just going to be driven. It's just always gonna be part of the debate. So I get it. It's what makes sports fun, but it can't be the only driver of a great player, because obviously Chris Paul is a great player. Like there's it's obvious. Yes. Has he had some weird stuff like when it gets down to these final moments? Yeah. The resume looks bad in that respect. The rest of the resume looks amazing. And so you just say, what is it? If you're gonna just like really go for brass tacks near the end of it, then yeah, you're just gonna probably miss the forest for the trees. And yes, it's mostly just like he's a great player that never won a championship. That's it. Like just say that then. If you just need to do it, it doesn't make.
I was gonna say great. Like it's. At that point, might as well be like, well, what was his hairstyle over the course of his career? Did he wear a certain type of uniform? What was his fashion sense? Like that sometimes is the minutia. It feels like you end up getting into these things. But one thing that I thought about here, we're going to get into the Nets and also to Kyrie Irving as this is defined by Kevin Durant. But did you in any way take, because we talked about it before we did get started on this one, did you take this Kevin Durant, the way he framed the second response, that it's not necessarily about titles. You can do a lot of things to be a great player and to play winning basketball, and championships need not be the defining characteristic. Did that bring up the old antenna around, they got this guy under contract. Looks like titles might not be the first thing he wants to check here. And he's comfortable having already won championships to say, I can go on being one of the greatest players in NBA history and not worry about needing to check off that box over the back end of my career.
It's funny. I didn't actually take it that way. Did you? I can give my response, but like, did you take it that way? You did?
I took it. I filtered it this way, and this is how I contextualize it. When Kevin Durant said it, I didn't think anything of it. I thought he was just giving a thoughtful response, as he usually does around this stuff. He wants to engage in it. But if I passed it through, if it came out of Kyrie Irving's mouth, my brain would have interpreted it a number of different ways potentially. So it is dependent, I think, on who says it. Kevin Durant saying it, I take it as, oh man, that's interesting. Continue the conversation. If Kyrie had verbalized this off of the seasons he's had with Brooklyn and his career in general, you might go, okay, so what does that mean for you going forward? Kevin Durant.
Well, remember, he has a championship. So like,
but that's what I mean though. So he's checked that box. So if Kyrie Irving said this exact same response based on everything else in his track record, you might go, so what does that mean for you going forward about being dedicated? Whereas Kevin Durant has won the championships and you've never questioned what his dedication or drive around basketball is.
Yeah, like just even putting Kyrie aside, like I think Durant, frankly, short of the championships, doesn't even can answer this question, because again, when we went through the box check of what you would agree to be the things that every player needs to do, he already checks it all off. Yep. He happens to have it. How he got it, I know that's under debate, but like whatever, there's no debate about how great he's been. I did take this a slightly different way though. I looked at it more as like the window opened to so many more players being able to be like good, great within this framework, that I actually took it as a positive, that you could say, oh, I wonder how many players Katie just thinks as a winning player that other people wouldn't think of like that.
Yeah. That's a really great way to go. Yeah. I like that.
That's how I sort of interpreted it. I was like, oh man, maybe the list is like way longer than we should. Like we need to give a lot more of these guys credit, I think. And I was actually wondering if that was the way he took it. Who knows, right? Like it doesn't matter. But the way I thought about it was like, oh, I wonder if Katie's just opening this to being like, hey, you could be on a team with me and we all can kind of be great together if you're willing to do all these things. And like it just opens the door for you to be a great player too. Not at superstar level like KD. You're not going to have like some of the physical attributes just to start, right? But you can start getting closer by doing some of these things. And that's just how I kind of interpreted it.
Yeah, windows into our soul. I trended very dark, and Doug went with a much more positive direction. But, and I'll even add on to that, I think that you can look, if we want to say like what's the most positive version of it, that is sending a message to maybe your teammates, right, to young players in the league, like, hey, you can check off a lot of these boxes and need not be the LeBron James or or the Kevin Durants of the world. You can still do a lot of things really well in and around a team and be a contributor to winning a championship, which I think does feed into Kevin Durant's general sense of total basketball. But then,
oh yeah, totally. Because if you follow his feed, sometimes he'll kind of comment on like highlight videos and he'll just call them garbage because he'll say like they're learning bad habits, and these are like kids and stuff. Like they're learning bad habits, and it's just not what they should be doing. He's just being honest. He's right. Yeah. It's like some of these highlight videos, and he'll just like wholly unimpressed with it because he's like, this is just not how you should be learning basketball. So I think it comes from a genuine love of basketball place for him. I think it always does. I think he deserves well beyond the benefit of the doubt when it comes to that stuff. All right, we're going to talk about some of these Nets guys here in a second. Got to talk to you first about our partners over at Bet Online, the number one source for all of your betting needs. Sports info rolling you through the NBA playoffs now with all the latest odds. They got all the sports developments, all the news. Like I said, through the playoffs, got Major League every single day, fights. They're getting thrown out NFL futures for next season already. Go and check those out. Bet Online is your number one source for all sports wagering information. Got the live betting, throw in some esports. It's all there on Bet Online. Head on over to betonline.net. You use your mobile device. You learn about the trends. You learn about the action. You get caught up on what is happening in the betting world. Bet Online, where the game starts.
okay, so maybe you call a little tease there if you're watching on YouTube, as we get our title cards a little mixed up sometimes. I want to kind of get this one out of the way because I'm curious about your response to this before we focus in. Really, I actually find it fascinating to look at this roster now in Brooklyn and ask this question. There's one guy that immediately jumps out for being the poster child for Kevin Durant's ideal version of a player. But does Kyrie Irving check more than not the boxes that Kevin Durant lays out for being one of the best players in the NBA? Do you, and I think a lot of this stuff to me is going to come maybe in those intangible categories that Durant mentions.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, by the way that he defines it, I think KD at least, probably thinks he does too. He's close with Kyrie. I think he really respects Kyrie as a basketball player. I think they've made that very clear in the past that he respects Kyrie's game. I think most basketball players respect just like his on-court game. So I think that's it. I think in Kevin Durant's eyes, that would, he fits most of the bill. And I think honestly, like we said before, Kyrie on the court for the most part does check all these boxes. It's really never the on-court stuff that gets in his way. I mean, short of just being weaker in some defensive matchups and stuff.
Let me briefly, because we can sidestep this one. It was a curious little add-on to this team examination. But do you think that guards probably suffer by these standards? Because you mentioned the one about guarding multiple positions and being size for your position. Well, because the other guy that came to mind at the top of the show was like a guy like Trae Young. Well, okay, you can check a lot of the right boxes, but then defensively, the lack of size, right? Or any player that you look at in the league at one of those backcourt positions, you're going to go, yeah, and if you're a little bit undersized, how much can you do effectively in that sense of the game that's going to elevate how you're looked at overall? So that's
you
one.
Can't get bigger. You can't get bigger, but you can put an effort. I think Kyrie clearly puts an effort on the defensive end. I think he always has. Like, he is very active defensively. He is not like a great defender, but it's mostly because of things that are, I would say, out of his control. Like, he never falls into the completely checked out territory of like superstar defenders like Trae, who's seemed disinterested at times, Harden, who we've seen that multiple times, Russell Westbrook, that we've seen for years, that like just kind of not interested in it, like, I'll never put Kyrie, at least up to this point, put Kyrie in that category, because he's not that. He is very active when he plays. He wants to, try to get steals. He will take gambles. He will try to stay in front of you as much as possible. His size will always hurt him a little bit in this respect because he can't get any bigger, but it's not for lack of effort, right? And so, and with like true offensive talents like this, you can stay on the court for a lot longer when you have A+ offensive talent, right? Like, and we've seen, as other players have begun to decline, i.e. James Harden, i.e. Russell Westbrook, like, it gets harder and harder in those matchups to keep you on the court, because when you're also not trying on the defensive end or don't know what to do, you start, there's not enough of a gap anymore. Like, there used to be a huge gap between those two things, and it was okay. When the gap really kind of, kind of thins down, you just can't, or, gets smaller, then it becomes more evident. But I don't think the Kyrie has a problem with that. And the things with Kyrie that, like, frankly, the digs on him have never been about the on-court stuff, really.
No,
right?
no.
Like
And by the way, it's like you're looking through it again. Take away size and being able to defend multiple positions. Every other thing, to your point, the efficiency, IQ, consistency, energy, coachable. Like all of those factors are things that you always attribute to Kyrie Irving's game on the court. So that's always why when it's a basketball conversation, it's
can I
very
tell you
easy
who
to keep
the first guy that came to mind when I thought of this guy of
Okay,
when you
ready?
said this?
On the Nets?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1, Bruce Brown.
Yeah.
Bang.
Okay.
Bang, bang,
that was
bang.
not planned, folks.
And I knew it had to be. It could only be one man. Yeah, 100%, right? Like Bruce Brown is the exact guy. And this is what I was saying before, but I didn't want to give it away mentioning his name. Of when Kevin Durant mentions these traits, I think that you can, if you're on the Brooklyn Nets, if you're Bruce Brown, you go, hey, I'm that guy. Like, yeah. I'm not considered one of the top 5 players in the NBA, but guess what? I check all those boxes. Like, I do all of these things, and that's why I have so much value. And I guess realistically, you're also thinking, and that's why I'm worth a little bit more, guys, if you're bringing me back this year, right? But you can go into Bruce Brown if you want, but do other names jump out on the Nets as well?
I mean, I'll just say the reason he checked off the first one for me was because, I mean, for the obvious reasons of just sort of how he played down the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I would also put in, like, sort of just like adding the part where team above self is a big part of it, which I think becomes a part of, like, sort of what Durant's answer is. He never says that specifically, but he kind of alludes to it through some of these other things, where Bruce Brown was like the consummate guy like that. Bench to start the year. How can I get back in the rotation? Play your butt off on defense, right? Like, be all about defense, and then other things will come. Great. Does that. Can guard above his position, and especially in the regular season, did it all season long. Be a willing passer. We've seen that a ton from him. Like, from play above your size, even on offense, he did that. And then continue to get better where you're not a total liability. Now, all of a sudden now you can hit threes, right? Like, you're hitting threes at like a pretty solid clip to end the season. I think he was somewhere around 40% or I went to close out the season. He didn't end the season like that, but I'm just saying, like, down the closing stretch, he got pretty good at that. It was all these boxes that got checked for him, where it made me actually wonder how many other role-ish players there were out there that could actually look at Bruce Brown as the person to look up to, and not even KD. Hey, we'll never get to KD. I'll never be, 6'11", 7 feet with a wet jumper that can hit it over anybody and like this. I'll never be that. But I might be like 6'4", 6'5", not the best shooter in the world, not the best handle. But if I go absolutely bonkers here on this other end, maybe actually that will open up enough playing time for me that I can actually get a little better with my offensive game because I'm on the court now, right? Like, I'm on the court board. I can get more fluid. Like, I wonder if more players in that respect should look toward Bruce, and there's other examples. He's not the only one, but like other guys like that, and say, hey, it doesn't fit all like the highlight reel stuff, and it doesn't fit the superstar model. It's unlikely I'm going to be that anyway, but I can maybe be like this guy. And I think that's maybe what more players should look for when it comes to winning basketball.
And it's funny too, because you talk about some bigger names that fall off as they get older or fall on hard times. A guy jumped to mind was like Boogie Cousins, who had injury issues, but there's always just been this general sense. How dedicated ever was he to fully developing his craft? But when you mention a player like Bruce Brown, we mentioned this guy the other day, former Net in Jeff Green, right? Here's a guy that is maximizing what he is and trying to create and cultivate more value for himself. And when you think about inside, I'll open up this kind of the spectrum here, because we're talking about a lot of the offseason stuff for the Brooklyn Nets on the low end. And we mentioned him at the back end of the center episode, who's going to be back or not back, Blake Griffin. And we kind of I threw him out quickly, and you're like, maybe he'll be back. By the way, like, he checks all these boxes and also went through I was a superstar. I am no longer that superstar. And if I can check more of these boxes as I get older, that's how I continue to keep myself relevant and become someone who can be a contributor on a team. The other name that jumped out, just to round it out, for the Nets, came in late, buyout market guy. I think Goran Dragic embodies a ton of these attributes that you're talking about. And maybe in my mind, I just started applying it to, so what's important for the Nets this offseason is maybe making sure, guys, I have to have on-court value for you, obviously, but also keeping guys that check a lot of these intangible boxes in behind Kevin Durant and Kyrie, and we think Ben Simmons.
Yeah, if I'm being honest, I wouldn't mind the guys for me to just be younger. Like, well, so I'm
and real quick, Nicholas Claxton would be the other guy I throw in, where I say, he's shown these little instances. What I love this past season was he seemed to have a little more edge on the defensive and offensive end, right? A little more demonstrative. I think if his game can catch up with his mentality, I think he starts to catch some of these boxes too. And to your point, it's like I prefer like Bruce Brown is in the right age bracket. I don't necessarily want 36, 37-year-old Goran Dragic being like, well, he's plucky, ain't he, guys?
Yeah, because like even if he's like trying his hardest now, the horizon is getting a lot closer. So I just think that's, and I'm not trying to like just dismantle what you're saying, but
Yeah,
I agree. I mostly agree. I just agree with you, but at some point, like the wheels just come off you physically. So I think at this point, the Nets need to be in the mode of having these veterans is nice to some degree, but at some point, finding a guy like Bruce Brown, who was a total cast off from Detroit, and bringing him back in and sort of making him a reclamation project. Like this has to be sort of what their goals are now too, is like going and finding these next guys out there that they can transform, because they just have to get younger too. So I think it's a yes and.
Yeah. By the way, as we'll get out the door here, I think this is a tease for something we can cover next week on the show. Is we talk about you're going to look for value buys on the market. This might be this can be the model, checking off some of these type of boxes and categories, and guys that are going to be undervalued on the open market, but become inherently more valuable when you already have some superstars out in front of them. So it made for a good conversation. And obviously, listen, this is what I think Kevin Durant is great at. If you can go, by the way, check out his interview with David Letterman on that Netflix special, which I think offers some insights to his personal life as well.
All right, we're gonna get out of here. YouTube, appreciate over 100 comments over on YouTube. A real quick question for Adam. Adam, how many? Because I was thinking about this. We were talking about the other day, talking about just being on the Locked On Network, and just someone had asked that for the first mailbag, and I told you to think about this, but I didn't give you the answer. How many episodes do you think we've done on the Locked On Network? 3, 2, 1. Come on, we got to get out.
300.
388. We're closing in our 400th episode on the Locked On Network. I was shocked. I would have guessed way under that. I was like, just started looking it up, and I would have guessed like 200 or something. So anyway, we're getting close. I think like 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks from now ish, if we keep on this schedule, we'll be right around the 400th episode. So anyway, thanks for everyone for listening.
Birthday cake bar with you.
those are you that have been along for the ride the whole time. Much appreciated. Those of you that are new, appreciate that as well. Appreciate all the comments on YouTube. Over 100 comments over there today. Try to get back as many as I could in the moment. Keep throwing them out there. Really, really appreciate it. Go subscribe over on Locked On Nets YouTube.
Hey guys, the greatness of a man is not in how much wealth he acquires, but in his integrity and his ability to affect those around him positively. Why, that's Willie Marley.
Ooh, one of the all-time great poets.
R.I.P.
No woman, no cry. There we go. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.